Warning, 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 warning. Please be aware, all these novels are meant for adult-like humans, of 18 years and older. For they have situations and words not intended for the young or impressionable.
Hello everyone, and welcome. I am your host, Danny C. Estes. I am an independent author and financier of 9 novels and 2 types of comic books. In this video, I'd like to introduce a sampling of my first full novel, The Paranoid Thief. So let us begin. The Paranoid Thief is my first full novel I created. At present, this is my only science fiction story, yet I hope one day to add another. Our hero, Randolph McCann, a self-taught thief and expert computer hacker, learned all his skills due to his mother falling victim to a self-serving gourmet cook. Finding herself pregnant, unemployed, and blackballed from gaining employment, Randolph hit the streets as a young child to support his mother and unborn brother. Our story opens in the year 2050, when corporations own the world. Trapped into a hasty job, forced on him by a powerful city official, Randolph struggles with a damaged hoverbike until the ground jumps up to bite him. The following is a little taste of The Paranoid Thief. Randolph McCann crawled away from the smoldering wreckage of the cross-wired hoverbike he'd stolen and shook his dizzy head. With considerable effort, he stood and tried to discern the glow of the stars above, over those swimming around in his eyes. The ride over the treetops had been one wild scare, with peaks and eddies.
Definitely more excitement than I needed,
he thought to himself, then cleared his head of the obvious. While his mind and body partly refused to talk to one another, both still living the past 10 minutes, Randolph caught a momentary image of a tree amongst the hybrid bushes of Willing City Park and stumbled over to sit his butt down before gravity took over.
I made a tactical error tonight,
Randolph needlessly told himself.
One which could have been detrimental to my well-being, if not to my freedom.
With his head laid back against the tree, Randolph tried to focus on the pile of hardened twisted aluminum which once resembled the latest achievement in aerial dynamics.
Perhaps it's time for Plan D,
he mused as he gathered his wits.
After all, the first 3 are history now, which means the job is history. Very problematic.
Randolph looked to one hand, which had balled up into a fist on its own. Mr. Hilden had trapped him into this doomed caper and left very little doubt as to what the results of a failure would bring about. While these thoughts presented themselves vividly before his mind's eye, Randolph's body began to shake.
A reasonable reaction.
The shakes were not due to Mr. Hilden's threats, but rather from Randolph's heroic efforts to avoid being intertwined in the twisted metal some feet away. Uncertain how long the shakes would last, Randolph wrapped his arms about his abused self, which at present was encased in a very illegal special ops night suit he'd acquired for the job.
A rather expensive acquisition,
he reflected with regret.
But as I had no time,
Randolph laid back his head once more and swallowed. He closed his eyes and with some effort reconnected his scrambled thoughts with reality.
Yep, time to cut the umbilical cord and find someplace to lay low,
he told himself.
And I best get a move on.
He spoke the last aloud as if that would aid in his recovery. With more effort than he would admit, Randolph opened his eyes and used the tree for support in gaining his full height of 5'9".
Not a real impressive height.
His mind commented to redirect his thoughts from several painful abrasions.
But one which allows better anonymity to blend more easily into a crowd.
Once more on his feet, Randolph used an unsteady hand to pull off the black hood of the suit to better see, for the night vision had been rendered inoperable. As the hot, skin-tight material reluctantly came away from his head, the cool air of mid-November rushed over his damp, clean-shaven face and scalp of closely cropped hair which Randolph judged neither attractive nor repulsive. Randolph took in a deep breath of clean, early morning air and exhaled a sigh of gratitude that he was no longer dependent on the suit's chemical air system, an integrated part of the suit's stealth system which he had no need of.
But then again, one never knows.
He pushed away from the tree and moved a bit unsteady in circles till his landlubber legs quit wobbling about as if he were a toddler on his first steps of life's adventures.
I've been far more than lucky tonight,
he vocalized the blindingly obvious.
With only 2 weeks to scope out the security/safety measures of that 3-story mansion, my efforts to pull of this job were far more than epic.
Randolph paused in his commentary and searched out the zipper to the suit.
If only I could have backed out of the job. If only Mr. Hilden had listened to me. Now nobody wins.
Randolph argued to no one but himself, while he carefully stripped out of the outfit on steadier legs.
Now the package I'd been sent in for will go to the corporate authorities as forewarned, and there's nothing Mr. Hilden can do to stop it.
Randolph's latest target, the Hendersons, lived in the city of Willing, located on the lower tip of what was Arkansas before the inventor of plastic steel, Mr. Lewis Hess, single-handedly bought Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana, then renamed them as the single state of Lewis Hess.
Mr. Henderson, an executive officer for the batting firm, and Ms. Henderson, a highly paid lawyer in legal documentation. A pair of very intelligent individuals, who are sure to surmise rightly what tonight's failed escapade was all about.
Now that his wobbly legs were responding reasonably well, Randolph stretched his back muscles to work out any leftover kinks and said firmly to himself,
"To hell with it."
Without any regrets, Randolph wadded up the lightweight material which had cost over 30,000 credits to acquire, and disposed of the suit onto the heap of smoldering scrap aluminum and fiberglass like it were nothing more than a pile of old rags.
I told that blackmailing, pompous city official I wasn't suited for dirty in-and-out jobs.
Randolph argued aloud to the hybrid self-maintaining vegetation, while he extracted a saddle bag from the back of the bike. With contempt for the security lock on the bag, Randolph opened and drew out a white and blue jogging suit and continued to berate Mr. Hilden.
If that self-inflated ego had only listened. If he had hired people who do this type of stuff, if.
He told the park's vegetation and miniature inhabitants in anger, now that they had overcome their fright of his unannounced arrival. After a moment more, Randolph forced himself to stop his unfruitful ranting, and took in a deep breath of the earthly incense around him. As fall was covering the land, this meant the aromatic scents in the air would not be of sweet flowers and new growth, but rather the heady smells of bark and rotting vegetation. A distinct difference some people found objectionable. However, for Randolph, this meant the rebirth of wet weather, a distinct advantage in his chosen profession, as the migration of water molecules helped to dilute any leftover DNA. Randolph found a hint of moisture on the air. This helped in his bid for composure. After another breath to reinforce his thoughts of impending rain, Randolph slowed his flustered mind and reasoned his anger was a combination of fear and uncertainty. A knowledge Randolph used to reclaim a calmer state of mind.
Well, mostly,
he admitted to himself. A few breaths more and he focused his mind on Plan D, outlining its conception in his head.
First, get back to the workshop.
He began to tick them off.
Second, make unusable all equipment able to point fingers at my style of operation. Third, leave the state of Lucius by any means possible. Simple, really. Perhaps,
he reminded himself. If there was one virtue Randolph had plenty of, it was his grasp on reality. He knew very well Mr. Hilden had a band of muscle men watching his every move, a fact which had not escaped him from the moment Mr. Hilden introduced his right-hand arm, Mr. Stanton. The proverbial brick wall in human form, who walked in Mr. Hilden's office dressed in a top-of-the-line Harmanii business suit.
Geez,
Randolph remembered thinking.
The man's mug alone could stop someone's heart, making his over-large hands rather redundant.
A sound in the distance caused Randolph to cock his head.
Sirens,
he told himself and searched the skyline above the trees for the direction of the city's air patrol cars. Whether they were after him or not, Randolph felt he'd rambled on long enough, time to get moving. With a look in the other side of the saddlebag, Randolph removed a small round plastic pouch and discarded the empty bag with the rest of the present evidence to his attempted crime on the aerial bike. Randolph rotated his head on his shoulders in an effort to work out one last kink, before he activated the DNA Scrambler's 15-second timer he'd built from a simple 2-credit watch. He walked away, tossing the bag of common household chemicals on the pile. After a short walk, Randolph heard the charge go poof, which meant the small explosive sent out a spray of chemicals that would render all surrounding DNA unusable for police labs and dogs alike, a fairly indispensable homemade device for his kind of career. Uncertain of his current location, Randolph took a look at his compass watch, which showed him via satellite a small rendering of the 20-mile radius park. With an idea of where he stood, Randolph redirected his feet, heading for the jogger's path which he'd used this past week to make him appear as a new regular.
Precautions like this are always necessary to help in any alibi which may be needed if some unforeseen problem should arise, like now for instance.
Although he was early for his daily run by an hour and 20 minutes, Randolph couldn't wait out the extra time in the park. Mr. Stanton would awaken shortly, if not already, and be on the road to intercept him at his base of operations. So a variation of his alibi had to be improvised if he ran into trouble. When the jogger's path became easier to discern in the darkness by the path's illumination, Randolph stopped his jog through the woods to await a clear gap of early users. This precaution would ensure no one saw him enter by the woods, making him just another runner. But as no one could say they had seen him in their run, Randolph forced himself to slow a bit so as to be seen by others before he continued his run at a normal pace. As Randolph worked out annoyed muscles, damaged slightly from his sudden unplanned stop, he allowed a small smile to touch his lips, knowing his preparations has covered his tracks. But he wasn't out of the woods yet.
Literally,
He told himself as he rounded a hill. For up ahead, a little before the exit to the city's park was a hastily erected police checkpoint.
man, these people are fast.
Randolph thought to himself, but as his run and outfit would aid the officers very little in discerning his involvement in any crime, he felt relatively safe.
Besides,
He told himself to bolster his confidence.
checkpoints are only self-glorified shows of force, built solely to mollify the mundane city dwellers and no threat to anyone other than the inexperienced thief.
Randolph allowed these thoughts to trail off as he drew near the post, never even considering any abrupt change in course.
Because something is plainly incriminating, as that would have the police chasing you down in no time.
He jogged up on the station like any innocent bystander. Randolph pressed his lips firm to look irritated on the inconvenience to his run. With an eye to normality, he also began a conversation with a fellow runner who had been ahead of him, playing up on his part of just another average citizen. As he questioned the man on the reason for police presence, Randolph paid a token curiosity to the structure's video cameras, micro-directional mix and voice-commanded searchlights, while inwardly he fidgeted on the lost time as the officers worked through the early morning crowd. When Randolph was finally signaled he was next, he walked up to the decently built female officer, whose facial structure was greatly mired by her look of constipation. With a quick eye for even the smallest detail, Randolph stopped on the hastily painted white line as directed by an unmistakable large sign on her booth and heard her snap in a no-nonsense voice.
Name?
Bill Lenton.
Randolph lied with practiced ease.
Occupation?
She asked as she swept him over with an electric detection wand that only beeped on his watch, which she motioned for him to remove so it may be more thoroughly inspected.
Sales rep for Pro Tip Produce.
Randolph said with smoothness, pulling out his wallet to hand her a business card like any pushy businessman might have. The woman took the card and his wallet simultaneously, then read the card, checking both sides.
I see.
She said out of boredom to the routine.
Where from?
Lexvent, south of Port Bay City by the Great Lakes.
Randolph added as if out of habit. She remarked without interest while she pulled out all his fake ID cards and other paraphernalia a traveling sales rep might have. With a non-curious look to each item, she laid each down on her counter so the video camera could imprint them on file. Once the wallet was empty and the video camera had its time, she picked up his ID card with a fairly good picture of Randolph's long face, short stubby nose, average chin, and hairstyle.
What are you doing so far from home? And specifically, why are you out in the park so early on this particular morning?
She locked her eyes on his.
A pro.
Randolph omitted, his opinion of her rising.
Definitely a pro.
For the woman was watching his eyes to see which way they rolled up when he told his likely story. But as he had already run through the reason a few times in his brief run, Randolph began his fib with no uncertainty.
I've been visiting the stores nearby, demonstrating our products' differences, but today I have a big pitch to give to a larger corporation, so I'm out early for a jog to loosen up before the meeting.
She sat his ID card down and nodded, as if she accepted his lie, then asked with some hardness.
Can you then explain the cut and bruise on your left temple?
Wah.
Randolph reacted in surprise and reached up to touch his forehead. He winced from the light pressure on the damaged skin and his fingers came away with sticky wetness.
Of all the stupidity.
He angrily admonished himself.
I should have known to have given my forehead a look-see when my temple began to throb.
A small error like this could delay him even more, if he couldn't come up with a plausible lie in seconds. He touched the area once more to hide any showing expressions and thought furiously.
Well?
The woman prompted with impatience, apparently sensing she'd caught him in some illicit act, but whether that was a crime or not remained to be seen. As Randolph sought out a plausible story, his eyes fell on the two bulges in her shirt which caused his animal instincts to wonder of their true size, shape, and firmness. This distraction in the back of his mind brought forward a simple but typical male answer. With a quick mind to seize on such a simple story, Randolph ducked his head to look sheepish and replied. Well, you see. He stretched his words to sound embarrassed. I came up on a nice-looking woman and well. Randolph gave a hesitant laugh. When I passed her by, my eyes stayed on her instead of the tree I ran into.
Aha, and you expected me to believe that?
Her face radiated skepticism.
Honest, Officer McCormick.
Randolph added after he caught her name tag and pulled out a handkerchief to mop his temple, just remembering the throb on his forehead before he touched it.
All right, Mr. Lenton, come clean. Tell me the whole story, and your lawyer will be able to say you cooperated with the police at your trial.
Trial? For what? Running into a damn tree because I like women?
Randolph blurted with the knowledge she was only using entrapment tactics.
Last chance, Mr. Lenton.
She warned, signaling her back up to step closer, an intimidation gambit to get him to bolt for the trees or foul up his story.
But I didn't do anything.
Randolph said excitedly, not falling for it, purposely drawing attention from the other joggers, whose faces he surmised held looks in various degrees of curiosity to insecurity.
Very well, Mr. Lenton.
The officer said with hardness. She leaned toward him, her body language all about intimidation.
You had your chance. We've got your name and PIC ID. Should a woman report being molested and pick out your ID, 10 years will be added to your sentence for police evasion.
With a motion of her hand for him to pick up his articles, the woman looked down on her screen for any last-minute warrants for his arrest. When she found none, the officer motioned Randolph could go, as she held no evidence to hold him on any crime.
You may wish to have a doc look at your forehead before operating any vehicles, Mr. Lenton.
She said as he passed.
Thanks, officer.
Randolph responded in ill humor as his act demanded, refilling his wallet, very much pleased with his performance while she fished for the wrong reactions. In a few steps Randolph exited the park and checked the time under the halo of a sun lamp.
2:47 a.m.
He mumbled.
The skim report won't open for another 3 hours yet. It'll be time enough to tie up loose ends.
With a sigh to resettle his nerves, Randolph tilted his face skywards to feel the moist drizzle in the air. After a couple of breaths, he looked down on his wristwatch and tapped its liquid crystal to bring up the avenues of approach to his present office. With one more tap, the watch showed him all the pathways to the office, which revealed one pathway he'd purposely left untraveled, with turns galore that would throw off any unwanted followers. With a casual look about, to make certain of no police surveillance, Randolph set his feet in motion along the near-deserted avenue. I hope you were intrigued by this small sample of The Paranoid Thief. The full novel can be obtained on Amazon, as well as other works I have. In the meantime, I wish you well on your journey through life, and hope to see you again when I upload my next video.